What is up, Dynasty fans? This is Levi bringing you another episode of Data Driven Dynasty. Today, we're going to hop into some Dynasty theory and talk about the tight end position. And what I really want to know is how premium is a tight end premium. And so when we think about tight ends in a tight end premium league, we look at their projections, how much these tight ends score, and then we look at the top tight ends and go, whoa, they're putting up as many points as a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson, Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, players like that, those real difference-making players. And so the question is, how valuable is that relative to the other tight ends at the position? Because just because these high-end tight ends like Trey McBride and Brock Bowers are putting up a lot of points on your fantasy team, how does that translate to wins above replacement, to comparing to other tight ends who are also receiving bonuses? Because it doesn't matter if the tight end 1 is scoring 25 points per game, if the tight end 12 is also putting up large numbers thanks to whatever tight end premium bonus your league is using. So today, we're going to dive into some data, crunch some numbers, and try and figure out how premium tight end premium really is. First off, I just wanted to jump into a little bit more of how the study was conducted and what data it includes. So we went from 2020 to 2024, so 5 seasons, and took the PPR 0.5 tight end premium and 1.0 tight end premium scoring and listed out the first overall, third overall, sixth overall, 12th, and 18th overall tight ends, as you can see in this chart. Now, this is more of a visual representation of kind of what data we're working with. The actual calculations and the rest of the data will be in an Excel sheet that we'll hop to later. But this just gives us a nice outline of the original data that we're working with. And I just wanted to throw this out because it might confuse you later, but the tight end 1 scorer, you might assume that the difference in points per game going from a PPR to 0.5 tight end premium would also be the same difference going from 0.5 to 1.0. So if the tight end 1 gains 4 points per game in a PPR versus 0.5 tight end premium, you would assume that they would have that same bump in a 1.0 tight end premium. But the data doesn't necessarily always reflect that because certain players actually hop each other in scoring in different formats. And so if you see, there will be some of those discrepancies in the data as we go along because I'm not just taking the PPR tight end and then pushing their numbers all the way through. I'm ranking each scoring format, those players, and they're scoring individually. So the tight end 6 in PPR scoring might be the tight end 8 in 1.0, and so on and so forth. And so if you see those discrepancies, just know that is why, and it's because some of these players jump each other in these different formats. All right, so here we can see the data a little bit more flushed out. And what I want to draw your attention to are these shaded areas here on the right. If you wanted to take a closer look at any of this data for yourself, look through it, you're more than welcome to. I'll post the document down in the description. And then this data does go through 2024, but I just don't quite have enough room to show it all right now. But again, if you want to take a closer look at any of this, it's in the description. So what I really want to draw your attention to is this highlighted portion here on the right. And it highlights the difference in the scoring from a PPR to a 0.5 scoring format. And so the tight end 1 gained 3.5 points per game in this format. Tight end 12 gained 2 points per game in this format. And we can similarly do the same thing with a 1.0 premium, with the tight end 1 at 7 and the tight end 12 at 4.1. And then we can take this data and what we can do is then calculate the difference in different scoring formats and then to different tight end ranks, how much was this difference in the increase in scoring relative to the format. So tight end 1 going from PPR to 1.0, and then a tight end 12 going from PPR to 1.0. How much did these two different tight ends benefit? And so do that for every single year, and then across these different formats. And what we can do is average it out to find the, for the last 5 years, what's the average benefit that the tight end 1 gets in these scoring formats over someone like the tight end 12 or the tight end 18. And so 1.0 to PPR, tight end 1 to tight end 12 only saw a relative benefit of just under 2.5 points per game. And then the 0.5 tight end premium in that same setting only increased their scoring by 1.2. And then looking at 1.0 to PPR, tight end 1 to tight end 18, there was only a relative increase in the scoring of 3.3. And so the reason why I think this data is really important is because we look at these high-end tight ends and their scoring potential, and we start to compare them to other players cross-positionally in that same range. And so when we look at where like Brock Bowers and Trey McBride were going in the offseason, they were going super, super high in drafts, especially in Dynasty, with Brock Bowers going around, and honestly in the mid-first round in 1.0 tight end premiums, and then Trey McBride was being drafted like the very beginning of the second round. And so scoring-wise, if you look at the raw data, that makes sense because those tight ends were projected out to be scoring 20-plus points per game very easily. However, those high-end tight ends, unless you are lucky enough to grab multiple of them, or maybe to also get a George Kittle a few rounds later, or hit on a Tyler Warren or something like that, then it's very, very unlikely that you are going to have more than one of these high-end tight ends on the same team. And so what that means is that these high-end scoring tight ends are likely all going to be in different tight end spots on different teams across the league. And so it's difficult to compare them to other positions because these tight ends, the high-end tight ends, are very, very rarely actually sliding into a flex spot, which is more comparable, which would be more comparable to the rest of the field. They're only going up against, the majority of cases, only going up against other tight ends who are also receiving bonuses. And so when we think about their scoring in a 1.0, well, yes, maybe, a Trey McBride was projected out for 24 points per game, but the tight end 12 is also scoring like a low-end wide receiver 1 with like 13, 14 points per game because everyone gets these bonuses. And so the relative value of one of these high-end guys from going from like a PPR league to a tight end premium, I don't think, for the high-end guys specifically, I don't think that you can really project out that scoring really as kind of their value or project it out and comparing it to other positions. Because as you can see here in the data, in a 0.5 tight end premium league, you're only gaining just over a point. And even in a 1.0 tight end premium league, you're only gaining 2.5 points relative to the field. And so instead of, say, in a 1.0, thinking that, Trey McBride's going to score 24 points and comparing that to other positions that are scoring in a similar range, I think that we should be adding this differential to their scoring. So instead of then maybe in a PPR league, McBride, it was projected out for like 15 points. Will we move to a 1.0 tight end premium? I think that conceptually, it's much better to think about McBride is only scoring 17.5 points because, again, that is what that is the difference in scoring that you are getting, that you are benefiting from, really, in these leagues. And then talking about these lower ranked tight ends where the points really trail off, um, and really plateau. Even in a 1.0 tight end premium league, you're only gaining 3.3 points per game relative to super replaceable tight ends. And so instead of gaining, 6 or 7 points per game, like a lot of the tight end ones do in 1.0 formats, again, we just have to remember that everyone is receiving these bonuses. But raw scoring isn't the only thing that should be taken into account when we're talking about these tight ends in these tight end premium leagues. And so I think WAR definitely has a place in this conversation. And so just a little bit more about wins above replacement. So the wins above, or the replacement players that we're comparing to, are actually an average of kind of the next player up after we exclude the starters for a position. And so for a running back, if you're in a start 2 running back league, and then there's some flex spots that you could start running backs, but it's only required that you start 2 each week, then the top 24 running backs would be kind of set aside. And then you would take running back 25 through 36, average out their scoring, and then that would be kind of the replacement player that you're comparing each of the other players to. And so for tight ends in a 12-team start 10 league, where you only have to start 1 tight end per week, the replacement tight end is going to be an average of the tight end 13 through the tight end 24 scoring. So in 20, I just only did these calculations for 2024, but let's take a look. So in 2024, tight end 1, Brock Bowers in WAR across the board. Even though McBride and Kittle were very similar in scoring, Bowers played all 17 games, which boosts up your WAR. The more games you play, the more wins that you will be able to provide your fantasy manager's team. So Brock Bowers in PPR leagues gave you a WAR of 1.19, 31st overall. 0.5 tight end premium jumped up to 1.59, and then at a 1.0 jumped up to 2.02, 7th overall. And so that's pretty good. The wins above replacement for Bowers in a 1.0 tight end premium, you get all the way up to 7th overall with only a couple of quarterbacks, then guys like Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley ahead of him. And so that's really reassuring just from first glance. However, when we're talking about the replacement players at the tight end position, after the tight end like 6, 7, 8 range, the tight end scoring really starts to trail off and then plateau. And so the replacement tight ends, I think, are on average significantly worse than the starting tight ends, especially when we compare this to WAR for like a wide receiver, where the top 24 wide receivers are really good, but then also those 12 wide receivers that are up next are also very good, and can give you some pretty good scoring. So when we really think about it a little bit more, I think that the WAR for the tight end position is just a little bit inflated because the replacement players get so bad so quickly, and the scoring gets so poor so quickly. If we look at the tight end 12 and their WAR, you do see a similar increase in WAR as you go through these tight end premium leagues. The WAR or the tight end 12 actually changed in every single format. Again, it's because that scoring is so close together. We have Taysom Hill, Hunter Henry, and then Tucker Kraft, all being the tight end 12 in a different format. And so when we look at the WAR gained from the tight end 1 compared to the tight end 12. Very similarly to what we did with the scoring, kind of measuring that difference in the gain across these different formats. The tight end 1 did have significantly more WAR, so 0.28 WAR increase and 0.5 tight end premium. And then in the 1.0 tight end premium gained about half a point of WAR. So I think that what this data tells us is that it's very important when you get into these tight end premium leagues to not go zero tight end, to not have a replacement level tight end. And so the tight ends like the top few guys, those difference makers in scoring, right, are going to be up there in value, but then also we should be trying to get those like 4 through like 8, 9, 10 ranking scoring tight ends. Because if you wait on the tight end position in these premium formats, then you are getting less and less tight end premium bonus. And the people who have those high end tight ends are really going to have a big difference in their tight end position. However, if you have the tight end 6, 8, 10, whatever, there's not that big a difference in their raw scoring from across formats. So again, the point is it's really important to have a relevant tight end in tight end premium leagues. It's way less important than I think it is kind of thought of it by the community to have one of these high end tight ends in a tight end premium format. Because again, these mid-tier tight ends are getting pretty replaceable or insignificant differences in their scoring based on the premium compared to these high-end guys. So the example that I wanted to talk about with this idea is that if you have a league where every quarterback, if they are the starting quarterback for their league, you get an extra 100 points. And so Josh Allen scores 125 points relative to, 25-ish points that he's averaged over the last few years. And so you might think, quarterbacks are scoring a ton of points. We need to draft them really highly. However, every starting quarterback is getting the same bonus. And so what this does is those high-end quarterbacks honestly probably shouldn't gain much value because everyone is starting them regardless. But it's these like QB3s and backup QBs that would gain value because you really, really don't want to be caught in a position where you aren't starting one of these quarterbacks because they get such a huge bonus that if you don't have one, you're kind of in a hole. And so I feel, again, that's just an over-exaggeration of kind of the same concept where you want to have one of these tight ends that's actually getting volume and having some production, but you don't necessarily need one of the high-end guys in order to benefit from a tight end premium. And so instead of elevating the top tight ends, I think that these premiums should really be elevating kind of those middle tier tight ends, and then those also those like long shot tight ends, right? Those dart throws. Because when one of those guys hits, it's a much bigger benefit in a tight end premium league. So we've gone through some of the raw data, and now I want to put some names to the numbers. And so in 2020, it was Travis Kelce who was the #1 overall leader. And so we're looking here at the right at PPR rankings per game. So Travis Kelce in 2020 was just leading the field, 20.8 points per game. And then you had Darren Waller and George Kittle also really having some difference-making production before you jump down to the tight end 4 with Mark Andrews, where things really started to taper off, right? So 12.2 and then 11.8 for Robert Tonyan. And so here, I'd say that, the tier one of really like difference making guys was Travis Kelce to George Kittle at 3. So there's like 3 guys, and then there wasn't really like a mid range, it felt like, because we go from 12 to 11.8, then to 11, 11, 10.6, 10.5. Like it really trails off. Maybe you could say that like Mark Andrews and Robert Tonyan were maybe in a little bit of a tier of their own. But we have these 3 guys up top, and then maybe like 2 in sort of a middle range, and then it tapers off. Going to 2021, we have Mark Andrews coming through as the tight end 1 with Travis Kelce in number 2. And here it feels like the kind of maybe the top tier. There was 4 real difference-making tight ends in Andrews, Kelce, Kittle, and Gronk. And then you had a couple of 12-point scorers here down to TJ Hawkinson, and then it really starts to taper off as we get into the 10s. And then it takes all the way through to the tight end 12 to get under 10 points as we go down. So 2022, again, Kelce's on top. And really in 2022, it felt like, it looks like Kelce was in a tier of his own. And then we have maybe from George Kittle down to Zach Ertz, so 6 tight ends who were kind of giving more of a middling production profile. And then it tapers off and plateaus at tight end 7. And then 2023, Kelce's on top again, 14.8 points. Hawkinson's right below him, and we have Laporta and Ingram. All kind of killing it. Again, these are points per game. I think Laporta was the tight end 1 overall because Hawkinson and Kelce both missed some time. Yes, and so if we look at the left here, we can see that Laporta played 17 games. Kittle and Kelce played less than that. Hawkinson also played 15 games. But on a points per game basis, it was really those top like, and honestly, it doesn't really seem like there was a huge tier here for these top guys. It was more like from Kelce down to Kittle. There was just a kind of a big range of these are the guys that are really giving you difference making production, and then on a average points per game basis, there's a drop off to kind of Cole Kmet, then McBride, and then we again start to plateau off. And then looking at 2024, last year we have Kittle up top on the points per game scoring, and then there was very clearly a tier here for Kittle, Bowers, McBride, and then you jump down and we actually have 4 more guys who are above 12 points, and then ending with Kelce, and then Mark Andrews and Laporta both had about 11. And so some of the rhetoric around last season was like there's Kittle, Bowers, or McBride, and then no one else mattered. There was a huge drop off. But honestly, when we actually look at the scoring, there isn't a huge difference, 2 points per game ish between those top 3 and then the next 3 guys. And so the tight end landscape in 2024, I don't think was as barren as people really thought, because we weren't excited about these tight ends that were kind of scoring in that middle range. And then Njoku is a guy that got hurt. And I think he only played 5 or 6 games. And so he wasn't consistent for you. Laporta and Andrews are both guys who came on really weak early and finished the year strong. I think Taysom Hill also got hurt halfway through the year last year. Jonnu Smith is another guy who kind of came out of nowhere. And there was just a lot of injuries in 2024 that felt like they held a lot of players back. Like Evan Ingram didn't play very many games, and David Njoku didn't play very many games. Taysom Hill got hurt. Laporta, Mark Andrews entered the season hurt. I don't even think Hawkinson, made the top 18 here. And I guess neither did Ingram. because they were injured, they missed games, they came out of games early, and so that really uh, tanked their scoring. And so there was a lot of expectations for a lot of tight ends last year, and then honestly, just a lot of injuries for some of those guys that we were expecting to score better, and then a lot of kind of no name or low expectation tight ends popping off, and guys like Taysom Hill, Jonnu Smith, Zach Ertz, Kate Otten, stuff like that. And so the reason why I wanted to run through kind of this and just take a look at the scoring is because when we scroll back through, the guys who are consistently at the top of this list are George Kittle and Travis Kelce. So Kittle, third in 2020, third in 2021, second in 2022, and then he was seventh in 2023, dealing with injuries a lot that season, and then back up to number one in 2024. And then we also have another guy who's was consistently leading these rankings was Travis Kelce at 1, 2, 1, 1. And then we saw that drop off last year. Now he's down at 7. And then, so those honestly like the only two tight ends who were consistently scoring in like the 1 through 3 range of tight ends in that like top tier, that difference making tier of production. Because if we look at some of the other guys who are in the top 3, in 2020, we have Darren Waller jumping up there next year. Is he even on the list? Like, he's number 6. Okay, he is. But then that production falls off. In 2021, we have Mark Andrews with his huge season at 17.5 points per game. And then next year, he's back down to 12.6 points per game. So he's still top 3, but he really wasn't giving you that difference-making production. And then we move to 2023, and we have TJ Hawkinson and Sam Laporta and Evan Ingram all kind of showing out here. And then we go to 2024, and none of them really, are in the top 6 players now. And so what this goes to show is that the tight end position, the scoring is super unstable, very inconsistent outside of very specific players in Travis Kelce and George Kittle. And so we see these players who have these big blow up seasons at tight end, and then the next couple of years, it's like they don't do anything really special for your fantasy team. And so the conclusion that I kind of draw from this is that the tight end position is just really situation dependent, and it gives more to variance than other positions do. And so first off, with the instability, right? And the situation-based aspect of it, we look again at George Kittle and Travis Kelce. They're players who have been on the same team long-term with good coaches who run good offenses. They've consistently been the top option or one of the top options in their offenses. They are just some of the very, very best tight ends in the league, like many of these players on the list are, but they've been in consistent situations with good quarterback play and coaches who, have shown that they like to utilize their tight ends. And then we look at, some of these other guys like Laporta who, blew us out of the water his rookie year, and then second year was more mediocre. And then even this year, right, Laporta is doing better, but he's still not up to that same level of his rookie year. Brock Bowers, who shot out his rookie year and was, had a incredible tight end rookie year, breaking Laporta's record-breaking tight end rookie year. But now Brock Bowers is like 11th in tight end scoring through 3 games in 2025. And I think it goes to show you that situation is super important for tight ends, because someone can score really highly one year in a certain situation, and things can change. Coaches can change, quarterbacks can change, new skill position players can come in and can kind of disrupt what was happening in the offense and like sway target volume and red zone usage, things like that. Um, and then there's also the aspect of just increased variance with tight ends, because when we're looking at like the a wide receiver or a running back, just because of how many of those players you get to start and kind of just the different uh, like scoring for the different positions. If you drafted Jamar Chase this year as wide receiver 1 and he scores as like the wide receiver 9, that isn't good. You're like, oh, that was a bad pick. Wasn't a good pick. Like it didn't pay off. But it's like at least he was a wide receiver 1. However, if you pick like the number 1 tight end in Brock Bowers this year, and now he's performing at like tight end 11, it's like, oh man, this sucks. Like the sky is falling. This is horrible. And I really kind of wanted to highlight Laporta last year. So he was being drafted as the tight end 1, and he finished as the tight end 9, and his value just absolutely tanked. And there wasn't actually that big a difference in scoring from 13.8 points per game to 10.9, especially when you look at the back half of the season. But just the like the rhetoric around him, the general consensus, the view, like what he was just, even after that strong finish at the end of the season, people had very little faith, and he dropped from, like a mid-second round draft pick in Dynasty startups to like a 5th, 6th round draft pick in these startup drafts. And so the difference between like the tight end 1 and then like the tight end 4, 5, 6, or even lower is way bigger than if you have a wide receiver who you drafted as to be the wide receiver 1 overall, who actually finishes as like the wide receiver 9, which I think is about what CeeDee Lamb did in 2024 as well. There's just so much of a bigger difference in dropping like 4 or 5 spots as a tight end, because you only start 12 of them, versus the wide receivers, where and it's the same thing for running backs, but we're just using wide receivers as an example. If you drafted someone as the wide receiver 1 and they've actually turned out to be the wide receiver 9, it doesn't feel like was as bad as something similar happening at the tight end position.
Now let's jump into the conclusion. So what does all this data tell us? What does it all mean? So first off, the advantage that the high-end tight ends give you in tight end premium formats really is overestimated by the general fantasy football community, because the tight end 1 on a season on average is only getting about 2.5 more points per game than the tight end 12. But it is also important to have a productive tight end, preferably in the top 12 or at least close to it. And we can see that in the war, especially as we get into the 1.0 tight end premium, because the replacement tight ends do get pretty disappointing pretty quickly, and there are a lot of guys in that range that are propped up by touchdowns as opposed to volume. And so when we get into the premium formats, their scoring increases less, and so it's really important to have a tight end that is getting some volume, and generally that's going to be like a top 12 tight end. Next, if you want to take full advantage of tight end premium and take advantage of the large box score fantasy output of these high-end tight ends, the way to take advantage of it is to be able to stack them. So then you can have one of those high-end tight ends in your tight end slot, scoring you points, and then you can also slide like the tight end 2, 3, 4, someone like that into a flex. Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this from a team construction standpoint. That is the way that you would want to take advantage of that tight end premium because, in 1.0, a guy like Trey McBride, George Kittle, Brock Bowers are projected to score like 23 plus points per game in that format. And by stacking them, you're taking away both the competition's tight ends and you're adding one of the highest upside flex options you possibly can to your lineup. Three, it's very hard to predict the year over year difference makers at the position, like we went through earlier. The only people that, there have been several players that jumped up into that difference making tier over the years, but the only two players that were consistently in that difference making tier for tight ends are Travis Kelce and George Kittle. And even then, they both had years where they didn't really separate themselves from the pack or their production was less than difference making. And so it's really, really hard to predict who the difference maker is going to be at the position. And then we're also drafting like we are 100% confident that a player is going to be that guy every single year for their whole career. We did it with Kyle Pitts, we did it with Sam Laporta, and we did it with Brock Bowers. And so we pay this high price tag of I need this player to be a difference maker when it's so sporadic with this position. Who is the difference maker from year to year? And at this point, I think if you want a high-end tight end to invest in, I think it's McBride. He just has such consistent target volume. He's not reliant on touchdowns, and he is just the number one in his offense in terms of target rate. And so he would be the best bet. But what happens if the Cardinals, Marvin Harrison Jr. takes over as the one? What happens if they draft another good wide receiver in the next year or two, who can take away targets from McBride? It's so situation based because you really need that tight end, the high end guys to be like, if not the one number one option in the receiving game, then at least the number two. And it's still got to be close unless it's a really, really, really good offense with a lot of high-end fantasy output. And we can see that the guys this year that are producing highly are Tucker Kraft, who really functionally is kind of the wide receiver one a lot of weeks. With that team, it just depends on the week who's the one. Who gets the most volume, who gets the most points. And then you've got Tyler Warren, who looks to be the number two receiving threat. You've got Laporta, who was producing in 2023 when he was the second option, but now that Jamison Williams has kind of pushed him down to number three, he's not producing to such a high rate anymore. So the best bet would be McBride, but I'm just not even confident in him retaining that difference making status over time. I think he's just been in a really good situation. Obviously, he's a great player, but there have also been other great tight ends and great players who had difference making production and then suddenly they didn't. So, best bet is McBride, but I'm still not incredibly confident that his situation couldn't change in the next year or two and he could fall out of that difference making tier. Next up, this is likely a bounce back year for the position as a whole, because last year there was the top three and then the drop. And what that lends us to is less scarcity at the position as a whole. And so my conclusion is that the guys like Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and even George Kittle were getting pushed up fantasy boards, especially in Dynasty, because there was no other option really that we are confident in this last offseason. I think that there's going to be more players that we're confident in starting and a much better middle tier of tight ends who are difference makers compared to kind of the tight end plateau in scoring. um, but not necessarily in that top tier of guys. And again, just supply and demand. More supply equals less demand, and now we've got Tucker Kraft coming on strong, Tyler Warren looking like a really good tight end, and then we still need to see Colston Loveland really be integrated into this Chicago offense. But it just looks like there's going to be more options at the tight end position to choose from that we can have some sort of confidence in moving forward. Drives and yes, and this just drives the price down, especially of those top tier guys. And then lastly, I didn't show specifically any data targeting this, but um, it is my opinion that you should treat um, increases of 0.25 points and of tight end premium scoring. Just like don't even consider it because if a tight end is gaining, if the high end tight ends are gaining only 1.2 points per game in a point 0.5 by going up by a point 0.5 increment, going up by 0.25, they're going to gain like half a point per game. And that's like the tight end one is gaining that, um, historically at least. And so, people, and I'm not necessarily against a 0.75 tight end premium or a 1.25 tight end premium, but the difference that actually makes in WAR, the difference that it makes in like scoring, and difference at the position, it's so minimal, it's so small. I just wouldn't put a lot of stock in those, and I wouldn't necessarily push up tight ends based on just a 0.25 increase in a tight end premium. I think it's honestly kind of a scam. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for listening to this tight end dynasty theory breakdown, um, and I hope you enjoyed listening.